Hi everyone, my name is Adi Klevit and I'm the founder of Business Success Consulting Group. I'm all about processes, process documentation, process optimization, and the most important thing is process implementation. So my purpose is that you listen to this episode and you will take at least one thing that you can implement right away in your business to make it more organized, make it more scalable, make your life easier or freer. That's what we are going for, is going for freedom from the day-to-day operations. So listen to it and decide you're going to do at least one thing, and I promise you, you are going to regain your freedom.
Welcome back once again to the Inquisitor Podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today my guest is Adi Klevit. Adi is a specialist in process, and I have to say, I've struggled to stick to process most of my career, but what I found is process sets me free. It gives me more freedom, more time, and it also allows me to replicate so I don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. The other thing it has allowed me to do is capture my mistakes and then not repeat them, because if I have a process for capturing them, which is I use a failure log, and then on a regular basis, we go through the failure log and iterate our process, it means that we can improve massively over the course of a year. If you imagine that you make 3 improvements that you identify each day, that's 15 a week, 60 to 75 a month. Now, over the course of a year, that's somewhere north of 700 ways you will have improved. So that's the promise of today, a little and often, and focusing on being effective before you focus on being efficient. Adi, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be on this podcast.
Excellent. Would you mind giving the audience 60 to 90 seconds on your history and just give them a sense of what's to come?
Absolutely. So I started my career as an industrial engineer. That's why processes are basically what I've done all my career. The reason why I started my company, Business Success Consulting Group, where it's a done for you service, the process documentation and implementation, is because I would tell my clients I would work with them on strategy, on general business concepts, and I'm a really good business consultant, getting great results. But I would tell my clients, you need systems, you need to systematize. And they would just, week after week, they would be, we don't have the time, we don't know how, this is going on a back burner, but we knew that without the systems, you can't really grow. So I had said, well, how about if I do it for you? Really? You will do that? I said, yeah, absolutely. And that's how it all started. I found this niche where it's very needed. Entrepreneurs need help in creating their systems and processes and getting them implemented. They just don't have the time or the know-how. And that's how it all started. And that's what we do today, and help hundreds and hundreds of companies scale, regain freedom, empower the teams, etc.
Okay.
You mentioned something very, very interesting, Marcus, and I want to leave our audience with that question while they are listening to this podcast, is, are systems really hindering or inhibiting creativity, or are they enhancing that creativity?
Well,
that is a question that I would like our listeners to think, is it a myth or not?
Well, I'll come back to that. I think it's really important that you understand the outcome that you're designing a system to execute. And the problem is, more often than not, when people do try and implement systems, and one of the reasons why they stop and start, and they say, oh, it doesn't work, or it hinders creativity, is because they haven't put enough time into the design phase, and they're very often not able to get off the starting blocks. I was talking to a partner yesterday who I trained up. We worked together for several years, and now he's doing RevOps for companies. And he went into a crypto business where they were really struggling. The founder, in 2 sessions, by having a process, was able to generate 2 $400,000 deals. But more importantly, in the space of a year, they hit their 10-year growth target. Now, yes, there are some constraints, and this is one of the things that I'd like to lead with, which is constraint is a catalyst for creativity.
That's very true.
The tyranny of choice that causes people more often than not to get it wrong. So I'd be really curious about your take on that.
Yeah, that is exactly my take. We worked with several creative agencies. I'll give it to you as an example, meaning marketing agencies, creative, etc. And the successful ones, the ones that are really growing and scaling, are the ones that are very strict. We're not strict in the matter of like, I totally block the creativity, but very precise and well adhered to systems and processes. Because then you have the freedom to create. It's like a channel. Let's say you want to get from point A to point B, and you have a very, very rugged, very difficult country road with a lot of turns and it's not paved and you can't really get through and you get stuck, you're not going to get, how long will it take you to get from point A to point B? But if you had a very well paved design freeway that has many lanes, but there is no traffic, you're going to get from point A to point B very quickly. The car that you drive, what do you do? Like, why are you going from point A to point B? The music that you listen to while you're driving, all of that is like your creativity. It's not part of the process, but the process is the getting from point A to point B every single time the same way.
Well, you touched on something else that's very important, which is that ambiguity at the top tends to lead to politics at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't have clear process, then people will do what they think is right, or what's done to them. And the net result of that is often they get punished for it because we, at a leadership level, have not clearly defined the tolerances and the boundaries.
That sounds like parenting, you know. There is a lot of parallel, because if the kid doesn't know the the boundaries, then they don't know if they're going to get punished for it or somebody's going to get mad at them or not, because it's not clearly defined. That's a very good point, is the clarity and the communication, and it starts at the leadership level. So you're absolutely right. One thing that I like to talk about is the process-driven leader mindset. And the mindset, it should start with, do you want clarity or you don't want clarity? And if you want clarity and you want a culture of accountability, it starts with defining and saying exactly what is it that you want people to follow.
Well, to build on that, I think one of the most important and powerful assets and value that process brings is the ability to make decisions quickly and well without fear of punishment. If you have a clear decision process and clear boundaries and rules, then if you make a decision and it goes wrong, but you've documented it and you put it into your failure log, and then on a Friday you all get together and you work out, well, why didn't it work? That's a fantastic way of iteratively improving and bringing together the creativity of the entire team. And very often managers and leaders find themselves becoming a bottleneck precisely because they don't have the vulnerability to welcome failure and encourage people to run towards the sound of gunfire. And instead, people get their head chopped off if they deviate. And if they do fail, then more often than not, it's treated as a personality defect instead of just feedback. So let's start with feedback systems, because I think they're incredibly powerful and very few people implement them well and with discipline.
That's right. That's right. So how do processes play a role in feedback? Whenever you need feedback, you have to identify the issue. What was the issue you want feedback on? You have to have all the detail. And it's always a people problem, a process problem, or both. So you have to identify, when you look at the issue, what was it? Was it a people problem, a process problem, or both? Always refer to the process. That's why you have to have those processes documented, well documented, and known by everyone, so that you can open it and see if it was followed or not followed. What was the problem exactly? How can we fix it? So that's very important.
I'd like to build on that. And what I think here is really important is that when we have an issue, we treat it not as a people problem, but we always start with the process. In the Toyota way and in Lean, what they say is that the process must empower the operator to perform to the standard. If it doesn't, then look at the process first. Yes, absolutely, some people have issues. But in my experience, I've been doing this, I don't know, 35 years. I can honestly say I can count on the fingers of both hands the number of times it was actually the person that was the real problem, and it was the system, because very often they hired someone who was capable, and then the process turned them into somebody who underperformed. And it could be
well, it's actually a very good point. I'll give you an example. I was talking to a client where their revenue all of a sudden tanked. And I was like, okay, what's the process? Let's take a look at the process. Let's take a look at the process. And we refined it. And the process is not being followed. It's very easy to see that the process was not being followed. So of course it's a people problem as well, but the process were not being followed. But then with a little bit more investigation, he found out that his sales manager was basically doing something that was illegal. I mean, not legal like as a criminal, but it was basically, it was, he was working at two places. He was selling for the competition. It was just like, it became this like soap opera, right? So that's a people problem, obviously. But it was also the problem if they would have looked at the process to begin with and seeing that it is not followed, as opposed to, making excuses for it, then that would have been prevented, right? I mean, it is a former client. He called me because he had that problem. And I would say, okay, well, you have a process that is well laid out. Part of the feedback is to see if the process is being followed, because if it's not being followed, then you follow the trail of why it is not being followed. There was nothing wrong with the process. What was wrong was that the process was not being followed. So that's when I say people, the majority of the time, I mean, like, is it a people problem? Are the people not following the process? And then we need to figure out why they're not following the process. Is the process incomplete? Does the process have to be revised? Maybe something is not working, or it's really malicious, or I don't want to do it, or sabotaging, or whatever. I mean, there can be different aspects of it. But as you said, it's very, very unlikely that it's the last one. This is just a dramatic example. It's usually, I don't know the process is obsolete, we need to change it, it's not working, the process doesn't cover this particular circumstance, so we need to look at it and improve upon it, etc.
There is one element there which I see quite often, which is that the person who's responsible doesn't follow the process, but the person who is accountable doesn't enforce the process.
Correct.
That's exactly right. And that's often down to their desire to either be liked or to avoid conflict. And I think one of the most important lessons that anyone can learn in life and in business is that not all conflict is destructive. A lot of conflict can be very constructive. I recall speaking to Tom Shodorf, who took Splunk from 35 million to 1.3 billion, I think it was, in 5 years, which is a hell of a growth rate. And the business was effectively a different business every quarter. And they would get their sleeves rolled up and they would have stand-up fights. But they would never be attacking the people. It was the process. And they can disagree very vigorously, but respectfully. And this is one of the big challenges, that the process also needs to be followed through.
That's right. It has to be followed through. It has to follow by everybody, and everyone needs to know the process.
And you've touched on something else which is really clear, which is it must be documented in
Oh
language.
yeah, that's the first thing. I mean, how can you follow with no documentation? So that's always the first step.
Well, the language must be unambiguous and clear so that a non-native speaker could understand it without any doubt or equivocation and know where to wriggle out of. If you leave a crack and someone is willing to deviate, they can drive a coach and horses through it. So it needs to be watertight. And that's why we have an iteration process. And we also recognize the plan never survives contact with the enemy. So it needs to be constantly under review, which then brings me to my next question. I see in sales and marketing generally, most processes have failure rates north of 85 and 95%. And that is considered to be gold standard and best practice. 3% click-through rate on advertising is considered brilliant. But when you look at numbers the other way, it's 97% of the time you are just irritating people. If you have a 1 in 4 close rate at final stage, that means you failed on 3 out of 4 pursuits to identify whether you should even be speaking to those people, whether you are the right organization to serve them, and what on earth were you doing pursuing 3 out of 4 that you couldn't or wouldn't win. So in terms of a really good starting point, I would always suggest people triage their processes and look at them to see which ones have a 95% failure rate, and just stop doing those processes and then redesign them from scratch. What would your response be to that?
Well, how would you know? My response would be, first of all, the question, like, how would you know that there is a 95% failing rate?
Well, you're measuring so for example, a go-to-market strategy. If I'm cold calling, I know that I'm going to probably have to make 36 to 42 dials to get one effective. And I'm going to have 14 effectives to get one first meeting. And on average, 7 out of 8 first meetings do not result in a second. That's 3,500 touches at the high end and 600 and something at the bottom end. That could have been avoided if I only asked myself the question, are we marketing and attracting the right people?
Correct. So it's not a matter. So it's a matter of, like, each process you should go through it. I would also say that if you have a successful process that maybe has a 50% success and 50% failure as opposed to the 95% failure, you can also argue that you might take that process and improve it. So now it will be 60-40 and it's already working. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about because I have those marketing campaigns as well. It's harder. I mean, why would you invest in something that is already borderline successful and there's a lot of effort to get more? So yes, you can improve the script and take a look at it, but you can also then concentrate on that only has 95%, I mean, the 95% failure rate. Now you can get it down to 94 or 93, but then what? But if you can take the 50-50 and get it up to 60, you are definitely much more profitable. So I would say that you really have to look at, it's a 20-80 rule, right? So where are you getting the majority of your results and strengthen that before you strengthen the failing ones? I mean,
right. Well, I'm going to have to cut across you there because I disagree. I think what we do is we stop what isn't working first. because
Mhm.
that frees up time. If I'm spending 8
That's
hours
true.
a week on a completely dead activity, I want to stop doing that immediately. And I have a banding range. Anything above 85 to 100, we leave alone unless it has to be 100%. Arguing with the laws of gravity as an engineer, pointless. You're not going to win that one. So some things absolutely have to be 100%, but they're very rare. If it's 85% successful or above, leave it alone for the time being. If it's 84% down to 51%, that goes into the amber category. And you've got 3 months to turn that into a process that is absolutely rock solid. Someone is responsible, or different people are responsible for different elements. Someone is accountable. So you may consult and you may inform other people. Between 6 and 50%, that goes into the red list, and you have 1 month to do exactly the same. And anything below 5% goes into the blacklist, and you stop it immediately. No ifs, no buts, no maybes. And that includes all of your advertising, all of your outbound, all of your interviewing, the whole shit and shebang. Everything stops that is below 5% effective, because that means 19 out of 20 times you are doing something that will deliver only loss and opportunity cost.
Right. So you have a process and you define your policy. Absolutely. You have also in mind probably scenarios. What I'm like, if you have a 5% success and it continues, that's the only thing you have. I agree. But I'm looking for myself, from my own experience. If I have a campaign that is going and has just limited success, but I'm the resources that I'm allocating, if I give you an example. I have like a way of marketing that is not very effective, but it does give me maybe a client or 2 clients a year. It already up, the amount of money that I'm putting in there, some months will be like, why am I putting this money? But then it gets covered by that one client a year. Because it's just going in the background. So long as it doesn't take my attention and it's continuing, that's my opinion, it's okay. Because it's still, so maybe on an average, it's probably going to be much higher than a 5% failure.
Well, again, I'm going to take issue with that because of the dead work that it creates. If I generate one bad lead that cannot buy, will not buy, or I should not sell to, then that work and that time is not only wasted, but I can never recover the time. And it creates additional work downstream because I have to follow up, I have to chase, I have to react. So certainly around sales, I would strongly suggest that you look at those things and you stop them. And I know that most people will have a palpitation, if not a heart attack, at the thought of stopping all their outbound. But to be honest, it's not doing you a lot of good. There is an illusion that it pays off, but it doesn't, because all those people you irritated by filling their inbox, who block you, who blacklist you, that's not serving you at all. And you would be better improving that by simply looking at another approach that already works better, that is tried and test that instead. So
yeah,
on that,
I can see that. I mean, if it irritates people, absolutely. I mean, that's not, you don't want to do that and you don't want to hurt your brand. So I completely agree if that's the case. I think we just need to look at specifics, like really, and I'm sure that's what you are referring to.
yeah.
You have to evaluate with all the data, and really take a look at what is going into it. Like, is it irritating? Is it not irritating? Is it doing this? Is it doing that? But I agree with you. If it is something that is useless, stop doing it. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Okay. So if we then look at decision making, because decision making is a process and it can be documented, and it also helps massively in clearing the mind if the decision has already been made in advance on the basis of clear triggers. So I'd love to explore that.
Well, I think you gave a great example of a process that helps with decision making, because you had very specific benchmarks. You have a very certain of, like, if this is this, if this is that, and this is what you need to do. So if you have a well-documented process and you understand the benchmarks and the standards, you can see if the process meets it or not, does it need to improve or not, and use that in order to make decisions.
Excellent. Okay. So my view is that management and leadership should be systems and process architects, and they should create systems and processes to make the execution of the job that they serve possible and as low cognitive load, low risk, low threat as possible, because that way we can pass that work down the chain of command to people with lower skill and develop them so that they can grow. How have you worked with your clients to get both of those payoffs in terms of delegating an important task to somebody who is of lower skill and also cost less, elevate them and create succession and career pathing?
Yeah, if you have it documented, if you have the process documented, then you can delegate with empowering, because then you can teach the person to do exactly what is needed. And then you can also see where their skills are falling or they're not up to the standard that you want, and you can train them on those specific things. So that's definitely very empowering. Now, in terms of, you have to have measurements of success. You got to have the measurements of how am I going to see that the process is actually successful and the process is going well. The way that we do that is by defining the measurements of success of the process. And while you delegate, after you delegate, you monitor those measurements of success, and you can see if the person you delegated to is doing a good job. Those measurements of success are going to tell the story.
So again, having a structure, I think, is very important. And certainly for me, I find that I get paralyzed if I don't really know where to start or how to get there. And so more often than not, people get paralyzed. I remember 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago when ChatGPT first came on the scene, I took about 6 weeks not to use it because I was afraid that I didn't really know what I was doing. And then a friend showed me, and he showed me one prompt. And from that moment on, I got it. So very often it's just giving that creative spark and giving yourself permission to get started. So how do you establish that in an organization that has historically been devoid of these kind of processes and this kind of discipline?
Well, I asked the question, what is one area in the organization, if you had well-documented processes and procedures, will get you the biggest return on investment? And return on investment can be whatever you define. I mean, it may be more hours in your day. It can be, freedom to create. It can be freedom to open another business. And it can, of course, be increasing your bottom line and profitability. So if you look at that, if you're really honest and look at that, then you will find the area that is low-hanging fruit, that you can actually get a result right away. And that is where I would start.
I'm going to go a little bit further and suggest that budget is not, or return is not just about money.
That's
Return
exactly right.
on time,
That's what I said.
return
Yeah.
on relationship, return on effort. And these are all critically important when you're talking about budget, but also about process, because time is the one commodity you cannot get back or make back. And I would suggest that your processes, if they give you time back, and one of my favorite things is going into a sales organization and giving them 2 days per person back forever out of the gate within 2 weeks. And I can normally get it down to 4 days a week. Now,
absolutely. I had a client that answered that question, and she said, you know what I want? I want to be able to leave on Tuesdays at 4 o'clock so I can go to my daughter's preschool, so I can, take her to gymnastics. And I'm like, okay, we're going to go work for that. So that's the return on investment, is that mom time that she was able to spend with her daughter. So that we start with that. I mean, of course, there was more return, but it's the most the things that you cherish, that you value, that you want to do. Because, Marcus, maybe, I mean, I'm sure you encountered as well, when people want time, when you tell them, okay, I'm going to give you 2 days a week, some people can go, what am I going to do with those 2 days a week? Because they're so used to the raw, just like that grind, that they can't even think about the freedom. So I found that it's also important to find out what is it that you're going to do with those 2 days a week.
absolutely.
Because then you go like, you know what, I want to open another business. Good. What do you need in order to do that? Well, I need time to strategize. Okay, how many hours do you need? I need a whole day that I'm not going to get interrupted. Okay, I'm going to go to my to my cabin in the mountains and just sit there and strategize. Great. So Fridays are blocked off on your calendar. Now let's figure out how we can give you Friday back. That's the return on investment.
Absolutely. And again, if you give people time back, you need to make sure that because it's like going on a running machine and someone pulling the plug out. They're going to go flat on their face. So, idle hands make work for the devil. So what we need to do is make sure that you're replacing bad, unproductive use of the time with something highly valuable. So that whole process is the yin and yang of process development. So going through that process, a lot of people struggle with their vision and struggle with what they really want. Do you have a process for helping people to work out what they want?
Yes, absolutely. So the first thing is to decide, why do you want the processes documented? I mean, we spend a lot of time on that, not just because you read it in a business book, not because you listen to this podcast and you realize, processes are important. Why are they important to you? If you had well-documented processes and procedures, what changes with that cause in your life? But really look at it, not just like what you heard, but look at it from the inside. Like, okay, if I right now, like Marcus, I'm looking at myself, I have very well documented processes and procedures. Excellent. We always process, improve it and whatnot. so I know what it gave me. It gave me the ability to scale. But the reason why I started doing it is because I envisioned, like, what I really wanted is to hire people, but I wasn't able to do that because I was doing it all myself. Because my thought was, if I hire people, what am I going to have them do? How am I going to explain to them what to do? So, hey, I should take my own medicine and I should actually document it so then I can delegate. And it's working great, because now, like, even yesterday, I had a discussion with my staff. To your point, conflicts are good. And not conflicts like when you fight, but when you have the different opinion. Oh, I think it will be this, or because this is my viewpoint. Well, I've seen this. Okay, good. So now let's figure out how we can combine it to create a good final product. So that's the point, is like, you really have to define for yourself, what is it that you want.
So that then brings us to one of my favorite topics, which is, if you're in business, if you're in a role, the role is there to help you achieve what you want to accomplish in life. And
Right.
defining that better future is critically important. But what we also need to do at that point is understand what that better future is going to mean in terms of the choices that are going to be open to us, the things that suddenly become possible that were impossible beforehand,
Mm-hmm.
and to let our imagination run a little bit wild. Because I think what people tend to forget is that we massively underestimate what we can do over a long period of time, and we massively overestimate what we can do in a short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And process helps us shorten that time frame and get more done in less time.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of getting that process underway, the whole process of planning and systems design, can you describe to us what you would recommend a founder who's in a similar position to where you were, and they are a bottleneck? They are the reason why they cannot grow. And what are the questions that they need to reflect on so that they get out of their own way?
The question they should reflect on is, what will happen if the business was running without you? Like, really imagine that. But really imagine that without, and maybe you will get thoughts, well, I can't because of this, because of that, and nobody knows. Push that aside. Push those aside. I like what you said, the imagination. It's like you're painting a picture. Like, you have a beautiful picture behind you, and a piece of art, paint it. It's like, what it reminds me is like, there's brush strokes you can paint wherever you want. Paint that picture. If you can't paint that picture and you can't imagine that, everything else will be very hard to accomplish. What would your life look like if you did not have to work 80 hours in the business? But I can't because then the organization will collapse. And then, no, if you had well-run systems, if you had well-documented processes and procedures, if you had a great sales department, Marcus has been helping you and you have like a great sales, you understand how it goes. The barriers are not a barrier here. We find solution for every single barrier that you will come up with, but you have to start with dreaming. What would your life look like? Would you open another business? Would you look for other opportunities? Would you volunteer in the community? Would you pursue some other aspect of, I have, for instance, and I know an entrepreneur that decided that, they're very successful with 3 businesses and they're running on their own, and him and his family moved to a farm, and now he's experimenting in different, sustainable farming, and he loves it, right? So that is something that was his purpose, and that's what he decided to do. Another person decided to go full time into ministry because that's what they wanted to do. Another person is now traveling because he's finding international opportunities in order to grow his business. And he was not able to do that before because he didn't have the time to strategize, to dream, to imagine. And that is so important. So that would be really the first step that I would recommend to do.
I think one of the big obstacles that people have at that point is they often feel guilty. I don't know whether it's a Protestant thing, a Catholic thing, or a Jewish thing, but there seems to be quite a lot of guilt around looking after yourself, putting yourself first in any circumstances. And the net result of that is that we tend to become an obstacle to our own development and growth. How do we get
It's a good
past
point, but
that?
I want to say something on that, because I don't think it's always looking at you first, because I had this conversation with my staff and I said, look, AI is growing fast and it's a tool. It's a tool that we need to drive and utilize. If you do not give me the freedom as a team, me, I'm the visionary, I'm the founder. If I don't get that freedom to strategize, to imagine, to explore, to learn, we're going to all stay behind and none of you will have a job. Not that I'm going to fire you, but that's what's going to happen, because that's evolution here.
Mhm.
So if we do not stay top, like ahead, and understand how we can use AI to service better our clients, to service better ourselves internally, I'm giving that as an example, we are going to fall behind and we are going to become irrelevant. For us to stay relevant and for us to always have a job and for us to always be in the forefront, I need to have that time. So it's not really selfish. I'm not doing it for myself so I can go, go to the beach. Although, I'm going to, so that's one point. But I'll give you an example. I was working with this entrepreneur and I asked her that question. I go, what is it that is missing right now from your life? Work doesn't seem fun anymore. It's drudgery, and it's kind of like you seem stressed out. What do you want? What do you need in order for it to be fun again? So we went over her dreams of what she wants to create in the business and how she wants to educate her clients. She wants to create a university, and she wants to create that, and she wants to create this. I said, okay, well, what would you need to do right now in order, like when we are buying you that time, what do you need right away in order to make it happen? She said, you know what? I just want to be able to take walks during the day because that's when I can think, and that's when I can, that's when I can really concentrate on those things. But then she said, I feel guilty. I feel guilty of asking that from my staff because they don't get to take walks. They don't get to do this. They don't get to do that. And I said, Sarah, they do. They just don't want to do it. I mean, that's not important to them. That's important to you. So why won't you just ask them as well? Like if they have extra time, what would they like to do? Like how would they improve on their own functionality and their own output? And that was a great exercise because everyone has their own, if she wants to take walks, they don't necessarily want to go for a walk. They want to do something else. They want to research something, or again, they get the time to do that. So I think it's very important to tailor-made it to what a person wants to really do, because that will be the drive that will also help others around them.
Absolutely. And I think including other people is really very important.
Super important.
As a leader, if you're trying to be the decision maker on everything, then you're a bottleneck, and you also disempower your people, and they will eventually leave you because they're not growing, or you will just keep the ones who are willing to coast.
Right, exactly.
One of the things that, and a really simple process that has the most empowering effect is calendar blocking. And combined with journaling, those two systems, those two processes, empower my clients to work 90 minutes a day running billion-dollar P&Ls. Because they learn to prioritize. They use their time well. And the other time that they have is spending their time on developing relationships, developing their people, developing systems. But the day-to-day, the minutiae, the doing, is 90 minutes a day. Now, how cool is that?
That's amazing. That's
also raising 2 toddlers, by the way.
Wow.
Yeah. In both cases of the people I'm thinking of now.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah. So your time is the most precious commodity you have. Systems and process allows you to take it back and deploy it as you choose to the highest value and to give you the greatest satisfaction. If you're not using systems and processes, chances are what you're doing is creating chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we're looking at the flip side of the coin, what does a lack of process tend to create that people in the kind of positions we've been talking about will constantly be whining and moaning about? And this will be a moment of epiphany as they reflect and say, oh, shit, that's me. So what's the chaos that they create and what do they whine about consistently before they bring you in?
Lack of consistency, so lack of results. So every client or customer gets something else and they get complaints or they lose accounts. I mean, that is where it really starts being painful, right? Because let's say you have a great sales machine and you sell a lot, but then your production doesn't have processes. Then you start getting complaints, you start getting callbacks, you start getting, customers not being satisfied. So that's a problem. Ambiguity. So your employees or your staff don't know what they expected from them. So that then they start quitting or they're not happy. They're doing their own way, etc. Another big thing is also when you have knowledge that is in key employees' heads and you are afraid. That's what it's basically like. Chaos is what's also keeping you awake at night. Well, if I have this employee that leaves tomorrow, I'm not going to be able to do what they're doing. And that is very dangerous because you're being held hostage by employees that have more knowledge than you do. So that's why having processes documented is very important. The other thing that creates in terms of chaos is when you're going to go sell your business and it's basically dependent on you, you're going to have a problem.
Well, Rob Goddard, who's sold probably north of 400 businesses for his clients, has stated very clearly on this podcast, funny enough, that having a good documented sales process will double the valuation. Having a predictive hiring process will double the valuation. Now, If you have both of those things and you also build a bench, i.e., you're constantly recruiting. So instead of prospecting for new customers, which is your sales team's job, your job is to prospect for new talent and constantly be building your bench for every key position and have 5 to 7 people already interviewed, already lined up, and with a non-conditional offer that goes something like, Adi, we don't have a job at the moment. I'd love to interview you for when we do have a job. And when we get to the end of that, Adi, I still don't have a job for you, but in the event that we do have a vacancy and I come back to you and I make you an offer in this region, is there any reason why we wouldn't be able to have a serious conversation about you joining my business? Now, that will save you something like 12 to 16 weeks in recruitment time and get you another 12 to 16 weeks of selling time. It's kind of cool.
It's very cool. It's very cool.
And again, it's not really that hard to develop process. It's 5 lines. That's
right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the work that goes around, the hard work is to change the mind, understanding that this will work, willingness to adopt. I mean, all of that, that's part of this.
Okay. So we're coming to the tail end of the conversation. Let's narrow this down to some of the best mistakes that you've made along the way.
Well, not delegating soon enough, thinking that I can do it all and thinking that I won't be able to document my own processes. That was a mistake.
And what were the best ones, the ones that you learned the most from?
Bad partnerships, taking on clients that I knew I shouldn't. The mistakes we all make, I think, but we have to make it in order to learn from it.
I mean, we tend to learn better that way rather than learning from other people. I'm a huge fan of learning from the idiocy of others and then making my own mistakes as well. But more often than not, people will resist the temptation to actually put stuff into process because they feel like it's constraining or they feel like they don't have the right. I think one of the challenges with implementing process is not involving other people.
Absolutely.
And net result of that is that it's not their process, their fingerprints, their voice, their vision, their imagination isn't all over it. And one of the most useful exercises anyone can implement is the care about questions. Sales undoubtedly has questions of management and marketing and operations that they would love to ask, and vice versa. Finance would probably love to ask IT, what the hell are you spending your money on? Or marketing, why is it you can't attribute the result and you've got to throw so much mud at the wall? So when you are kicking off with a process development stage with your client, how do you create that structural friction intentionally so that the best processes are developed out of the gate and then you can iterate from there?
Right. We always do, it's like a relay race. So we always look at the seams at the parts of transferring from one to another. So a classic situation, and you know that very well, is between sales and fulfillment, because the salespeople are usually getting paid on commission. So they should. Well, if it's not getting fulfilled, let's say you have you're in the trades, HVAC company, heating and cooling, selling air conditioning and air systems. You can be the best salesperson, close the deal, they sign, and then operate fulfillment doesn't. They drop the ball. They don't call the customer. The customer is going to be irate. It's going to be so upset, especially if you're a good salesperson and you're reassuring and make all kind of promises. Then what will happen, right? So that's what we have to make sure, that there is transparency and understanding of how the organization works. And this is a simple example. Like, we work with more complex situation where you have fulfillment, shipment, shipping, receiving, customer service. You have all those departments that all have to understand how the ball is being passed from one to another to all the way to the end. So then they can also give the other department what is needed and receive what's needed. So then it will actually be like a complete manufacturing from beginning to end that doesn't have any bottlenecks.
So what you've touched on there is so critical, that every business is an organism and it has different moving parts, different limbs and organs. And if one of them is sick, then chances are there is a ripple effect that goes further downstream and will then eventually be felt by the customer and then reflected back in your balance sheet. So when leaders are looking at their process, I think it's really important. Adi made the point that it's the gaps, it's the handovers that we need to look at very early on. My friend Patrick Lindqvist was responsible for making Helsingborg the city of innovation for Europe in 2023. And they hired 13 managers whose job title in Swedish, I can't remember what it was the manager of the gap. That was their only job. It was to be the bridge between the different functions to make sure that things didn't get dropped between the gaps. And what a beautiful concept, and what a fantastically interesting job.
Amazing, totally amazing.
So that handover often goes bad because the people passing the ball over are really throwing over a hot potato because they haven't done their job right. I see this in sales very often, where sales doesn't do a proper handover. They just do a drive-by shooting. They sell and run, and then they dump it to customer success or the account management team, and then they have to pick up the pieces. I remember talking to one organization last year, and they had a 50% failure rate to onboard clients who had signed. Now, what a waste. I mean,
Totally waste, total waste.
And that would literally double their revenue. And they're a Series F business coming a year from IPO. And they're letting that slip through the cracks. But they won't change it because we've got a system. So how do you break that pattern?
You have to work on the culture of the organization. You have to work as a team. That's the thing, is like you have to break the silos. You have to make sure that there is an understanding of the entire process from beginning to end. And that's why when we start a project, if we see a situation like that, or even usually as best practice, is we get the entire leadership team and map the entire process from beginning to end. And that's very enlightening because we ask, where are the failures? Where are the gaps? Where is the place where you're actually losing, and what needs to be corrected? So if you have the entire picture from beginning to end, and you have a dedicated leadership team, because it's not a people person and people problem, and you have the right people in the right seats, then it should flow, and they should understand that and make the corrections.
So often the speed of the leader determines the speed of the group. And quite often the leader is the problem. How do we have the difficult conversation with them so that they look in the mirror and they see the truth as opposed to the rose-tinted spectacle version?
You just have the conversation. I mean, I'm sure, Marcus, you had several conversations with leaders like that, and some of them you can help and some of them you can't. And if the leader is set in their ways and they don't want to change, I mean, we are trusted advisors. We are somebody that you bring into the organization to help. It's a partnership. We partner with you in order to help you. If you cannot receive help, then we have a problem. Then you're not the right client. I mean, that's the way I look at it in terms of having the conversation.
And so this then brings us back to I think one of the single most important things that any salesperson and any business owner can make, which is deciding who is not your client, who is not your ideal. And that is a process. And if you are not clear about who your ideal customer is, who a false positive is, so that you can disqualify them, and what a false negative looks like so you don't disqualify them, then you're going to spend an awful lot of your time very unhappy and distracted and away from the stuff that you do best. You'll get stuck into firefighting. So if you find yourself firefighting, if you find yourself complaining about your customers or your people, look in the mirror and ask yourself the question, did I hire them this way or did I create them this way? Have I created the conditions for them to be able to do their best work every day? Have I created the conditions where they are able to make decisions well, under pressure with limited information, without fear of punishment, and if they do make a mistake, that it's not fatal? Is that pretty fair?
Absolutely, 100%.
Excellent. Okay, so we're coming to the top of the hour. If you were to recommend some great resources for people to maybe get started, books, podcasts, whatever, what would you recommend?
You don't have to be a process expert in order to get started. Yes, in order to continue and have all those processes, etc. The Goal is a great book, the E-Myth, and the other resources. I wrote a book. You can go onto my website. There is an ebook there on the steps to take on how to document. But my point being is that right now you need to start documenting. You need to start figuring out what is the best process that you are going to tackle, and go and tackle it.
Fair enough. We'll add a book list if people want to look at it. And
you know what I mean? It's kind of like, it's more things that people are now going to add in order not to get started.
If it's been done well before, steal the process. Talent creates and genius steals. And there are plenty of examples of people who have documented great process. And what you can do is you can just learn that and lift it and apply it in your
100%.
world. And interestingly, AI allows you to do that with remarkable speed and clarity if you choose to use it well. How can people get hold of you?
Okay, so the best way to get a hold of me will be to find me on LinkedIn. So it's Adi Klevit, so it's ADIKLEVIT. And you can also call or text at 503-662-2911. Our website, bizsuccesscg.com. So BIZ, success spelled out, CG for consulting group, bizsuccesscg.com. There is a contact us, and you can always email me at adi, at bizsuccesscg.com.
Excellent. Adi Klevit, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me as a guest.
It's a pleasure. This is Marcus Cauchi signing off once again from the Inquisitor Podcast. If you found this useful, then please like, comment, share, and tag somebody who could probably do with some help putting their process together. And get in touch with either me or Adi, and we're both very happy to take calls and to help. In the meantime, stay safe and happy selling.